Well, thank you, Angela, for coming up to Canada to join us this morning.
It's fabulous to be here. Thank you.
Well, so Angela and I had a chance to connect earlier in this week, and we both decided that a half hour may not be long enough because there's lots of fun topics to talk
You're
about.
gonna have to be like.
So I guess, obviously, we're in a world of digital transformation, of companies, of processes, of traditional industries that are constantly changing, where the internet and access to internet and digital skills are becoming all that much more important. And I'm curious, how did you come to this space? Like, how did you end up here?
Sure.
And I'd love to hear a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I really have been doing it since 1997, because that's when I was in grad school. And you know that because I got pregnant, and so my son's almost 21, right? Like you calculate it like that. And I had a professor who wanted to ask the nonprofits. I graduated from the University of Toledo, Master in Sociology. So we asked the nonprofits in the area, so what do you need help from the university doing? And their response was technology, particularly technology with our constituents. So that was my first kind of understanding that nonprofits that were working in low-income communities and disadvantaged communities were starting to interact and starting to realize that their folks didn't have the access other folks had. So we were setting up computer labs, we were teaching trainings, and back then it was maybe a couple of computers. If you could get 8 or 9 into a lab, nobody had it in their homes. Not in the communities we were working in, right? And if you had one computer connected to the internet, sweet, right? And then I ended up running the Ohio Community Computing Network. And even then, I had people saying to me, you know, you guys won't be needed in a few years. This will all just be taken care of. And I was like, well, I don't know, like technology is changing. There might still be a need for this. And so now I'm even more convinced my job will never, ever end. Right, because there's always going to be another divide.
Yeah, it's somewhat concerning, right? So
Yeah.
Tell me, like, when I think of digital inclusion, it's a really broad mandate. You can talk about access to affordable internet, which
Right.
is obviously a big piece, digital skills. You could talk about reskilling. You could talk about accessibility, which from a Microsoft
Yeah.
perspective is something that we're starting to, well, not just starting, that for the last few years have been really putting a huge push on in terms of accessibility of our products. So my space tends to go
Yeah.
to there almost immediately. What are you focused on, and where kind of does your mandate start and finish? Because I think you could probably
Right.
try to boil the ocean with this issue.
That's exactly right. So one of the first things that we did, so NDIA is about 3 years old. So quick side note, we just started because nobody had done it, right? There, just like you all are doing now, there isn't a place to talk about it, and well, we created a place to talk about it. And one of the first things we did was create a definition of digital inclusion, because there wasn't a definition of digital inclusion. So it's at the bottom of so our website is digitalinclusion.org. It's at the bottom of every page, the definitions of digital inclusion and digital equity. Because when you're in the beginning stages of a field, like somebody has to say what it is that we're all talking about, right? And it was super exciting to hear the minister and to hear Hillary talking about it in the same terms that we talk about it, because frankly, sometimes it feels like I'm just talking to myself in the States. so that was pretty awesome. And the way we defined digital equity as everyone having access to information, communication technologies, individuals and communities to participate in society and to be successful. And then we define digital inclusion as how do you get to digital equity? So it's the actual activities, and that is affordable home broadband, digital literacy, appropriate devices, because that mobile phone doesn't always cut it, tech support, and the applications. So when Hillary boiled it down to the 3, she used the word adoption. And that is accurate, but we found a lot of people don't know what that means. So actually stopped using the word adoption as often because people just kind of glazed over. So we nail it out a little bit more into those topics. And so NDIA ourselves don't work on the last one, the applications one, because we feel like others are working on that. And so we work more on the affordable access. We focus on the affordable, because again, the infrastructure part, some people are working on that. So we try to pick at the pieces that others weren't doing that we should address.
So don't duplicate what's already being done.
Yeah, right, that's silly, right?
So tell us about your affiliates. Like, how are you, where do you find your members? And do you have any surprises of the people that are part of your organization?
Yeah. So NDIA, when we got started, it was those of us who had been doing this work. Back then, we called it community technology, or we called it reducing the digital divide. And it was those of us who were just doing it. We're like, really, we should all, like, form an organization or something. So we did. Side note, we did it with no money. So you have the government of Ontario. You guys can do a lot. I'm so jealous. So the affiliates, part of it was us knowing who did the work, and then part of it was word being spread, right? The joke at our first conference was, I found my people. Because when you're doing this work by yourself in your community, and then you finally get to talk to somebody else who's doing that work in another community, it's super exciting. The surprise to our party was local government. We thought mostly who we would be gathering were community-based organizations and libraries. And then local government was like, we would like to come too. That was incredible. We're like, come on in, because you all are really essential to this. So we had originally thought of them as someone we needed to try to go after all the time and get them to participate, but that didn't end up being what it was. It was them coming to us saying, we see a problem, just as you were hearing from Hillary, like they see a problem with who it is that they're trying to serve, and local government is seeing that also, which is just a fabulous progress.
Mm-hmm. Well, and maybe I'll segue that into another question I have regarding the roles of government, right? Obviously, here in Canada, the federal government's just rolling out some initiatives to bring rural and remote broadband. I remember working back at Industry Canada way back in the day. It's got a new name now. And someone telling me at the time that 90%, that the broadband connectivity that we had, we were about 90% at that point, and that the cost to connect the other 10% would be as much as the previous 90.
Right.
And that was part of the major issue that we were going to have, is that first 90 was the easy, and then it was going to be the challenges. So I guess my question for you is, what is the role of government when you're looking at these things? Because obviously they hear it if you're in a rural or remote area, right, but also urban.
Yeah. So also urban because of the infrastructure piece. But then the other piece also is the digital literacy training, because it's not cheap, right? Talk to any librarian or community-based organization trying to do that. They got to pay their staff. And the infrastructure piece has to do with making sure that there's affordable internet everywhere, right? So the NDIA, some of the work that we're known for is identifying digital redlining in the States, which is a company, AT&T, I'm looking at you, AT&T, has chosen not to invest in poorer neighborhoods. Okay, they're a for-profit company. I guess that's fair. But don't tell us you're going to get around to it, right? The government's responsibility is to make sure there's affordable internet everywhere. So if the companies aren't going to do it, well, then that's fine. We need another solution. So that's part of government's role. Government's role is also the digital literacy, because it is expensive. Who's going to pay for those digital literacy classes? So the question and the discussion topic that we all need to be having is, what do we want the government to subsidize? What role is the government in bringing together the different partners? Like having events like this? Yes. Let's talk about some public-private partnerships. Let's talk about how it benefits health institutions and banks and retail to have their customers connect to the internet, and that they should invest in those activities.
Well, as businesses transform and everyone moves to digital platforms, and the same with government, and government's online, and that you're expected to apply for your EI benefits or your maternity leave benefits all through digital now, or online banking and the reduction of tellers. This is increasingly going to become an issue, especially in your economically disadvantaged parts of the cities, but also rural areas where they don't have internet and they're also away from major centers. So it's going to be very coupling into being a big issue. Do you find in the U.S. that you're getting the attention from the feds, or is there particular states that are being really kind of aggressive in their approach to this?
Right. Most of the activity we're seeing is at that local level.
Okay.
There's a little bit of activity at states, but the question is, it goes more like this at the state level. We'll all get a question for someone at a state government kind of location, and they'll say, so what's going on in other states? And I was like, well, you're kind of it. Right? Like, that's how much we have going on at the state level. But local government is astounding. So one of the things that we did on our site is came up with some very simple indicators of what it is that local governments can be doing. And so they've actually started coming to us saying, we want to be on your list. And our response is, okay, you got to write up what you're doing. And if it's a yes answer for any of our indicators, then we'll link to your yes answer. This is the cheap way of doing a project. You don't have to like write anything up yourself. And that's working, right? So some of the indicators are, do you have staff whose job it is? 1 FTE, don't make it part of somebody else's job. 1 FTE whose job it is to figure out digital inclusion in your area. Do you have money for digital literacy training? Do you have a digital equity plan? Right, so there are specific things, and there's a whole list of things that local government, that's where we're seeing real movement. And some of it's really small, right? Some of it is some part of somebody else's job, and they're working on smart cities, and that person is figuring out how to get low-cost internet to their community members. Awesome. That's a fabulous start. And then you move all the way to the other side where there's cities that have, Seattle has 4 or 5 staff. Everybody wants to be Seattle, right? That work on digital inclusion. Oh, and they have money too, where they award grants.
If everyone could do that.
I know.
And I guess that's one of my issues. So money is always an issue, right? It's what I'm learning, being in the private sector, is that it's not a private sector fully can't solve this problem. It's not just local organizations that can solve this problem. It's not even governments that can solve this problem. It has to be a combination of everyone working together on it. And I do think there is a place for private sector to be part of that. I can speak from our experience at Microsoft of doing a lot of work with our TEALS program and digital skills, because for us, it's about empowering everyone in the world to do more, right? That's our mission statement. So if there are people that are being left behind, then that's an issue for everyone. So there is a benefit for big companies as well. Do you find that you're getting interest from them, or that you've been able to find that level of interest with them as well? Or
I think it's starting,
growing?
right? I think it's in those kind of beginning stages, partly because this issue is new and it is complex. And so there's a hesitancy to step in at a certain spot, like what if you step in at the wrong place, right? So we are seeing a variety of initiatives that maybe they'll call it pilot, like Microsoft's TV white space, right? And that's fabulous. Like, I don't care, call it a pilot. Like, it's because we're all trying to figure it out, and it really comes back to the fact that this is all so new.
Yeah.
So that I think the thing we can really recommend and encourage is start some more pilots, right? Like, that's totally okay.
Well, and so you talked about the TV white spaces, which is an initiative using technology, which is the white spaces that have come available with the TV transition, and using that to bring internet to rural and remote communities. And it's been very successful in like Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, but we're actually working on, we're trying to build a pilot in BC. So there you go. So we're bringing one to Canada, but it's expensive, and it's, how do you get scale?
Yes, right, which is right. And that's the government piece of it, right? Like, if it's not affordable to do, it's got to be subsidized.
So we've talked about one of the major challenges, money.
Yes.
What are some of the strengths that you've seen of putting a national organization like this together? I'm sure there's lots of best practices to share. Can you share some of those positive pieces that have happened over the last 3 years?
Sure. So and I should note, we had no idea what we were doing. So the lessons.
Do we ever?
The lessons I can share with you are now like 3 years looking back. So the message is, it's okay if you don't know what you're doing. But I think now that we look back at it, our intention was to impact policy, because we knew these digital inclusion programs working on the ground didn't have resources, and they didn't even have awareness that they existed. Right, so we got started because there was federal policy being made in the U.S., and people didn't even know that digital inclusion work was happening. Like, well, they need to know it's happening, and they need to know these people have expertise on the ground. Some of them have been doing it for 20 years. So the lesson learned, I think, was that in order for us to impact that policy, we needed to create that peer-to-peer network of digital inclusion programs. Because I really believe the strength of NDIA is those affiliates and their expertise. Because I've done the work, but I haven't done the work for years, right? Like, I'm not the one on the ground. I'm not the one who's really making a difference in people's daily lives. Our affiliates are. So what I can learn from them, like the digital redlining that we realized was going on by AT&T, we figured out that was happening because our affiliates in Cleveland were trying to promote AT&T's low-cost offer, which is a good low-cost offer. We thought it was a great opportunity. And when they tried to promote it, they realized lots of the folks who should have access to AT&T service didn't. Like, they were simply had less than 3 meg or no service at all. Like, what's going on? Why is this happening? And then we realized that the digital redlining was happening. But we wouldn't have figured that out if the affiliates hadn't been interacting with us and telling us that that's what they were experiencing. So so even the other public policy work that we do, we can't really do that in a way that's legitimate without having the affiliates. So it has to be both. It has to be the network, and I really encourage it, like, it's awesome that the government is helping launch this, have them be a convener. But my recommendation is start that nonprofit off to the side, because you want to be able to tell the government when they're doing something they should not be doing. And if you're part of the government, it gets a little bit harder to do that, right? So set it off as a separate entity on its own so that you can say what you need to say.
So we want to make this as interactive as possible. So we have Slido.com that you can type any questions that you might have. Please interrupt, because I'll just keep talking otherwise. So we have a question. So we have, how do you see the conversations on net neutrality, everyone's favorite topic in the US right now, intersecting with digital inclusion?
Yeah, sure, that's a really great question. So I should note first that we've tried to like just be on like understanding of net neutrality without getting too far in, because we would have totally got sucked in and not been able to work on all of our other stuff. But yes, it does overlap and intersect, because as internet service providers begin changing their terms of service and how they operate in the United States, those who work on digital inclusion, our jobs just get harder and harder. I really think part of what NDIA will need to now be doing is getting the affiliates to then relay to us. Because again, just like that digital redlining example, they're going to be the first ones who see throttling and prioritization from internet service providers working in these low-income neighborhoods. And so we need to know when that's happening so we can draw attention to it. So it's going to end up being another awareness kind of issue. So really, this whole net neutrality thing is adding to my plate. And look, I had enough to do already.
So we got some really great questions. Thanks, everyone. Keep them coming in. So are there any international countries or cities you found that are addressing the digital inclusion challenge successfully?
The UK.
How?
They have money.
Where does it come from?
The government. They do. They have like millions that they put towards digital inclusion in the UK, and they so they work on and they go at it in all the different aspects. Which is, in the US, we have a particular challenge, which people only want to talk about infrastructure. Thank you so much. And infrastructure is important, but all the other barriers to digital inclusion or to digital equity are also important, right? So the digital literacy, the devices, the tech support. And so the UK is addressing all the different pieces, not just the infrastructure, that's incredible.
Interesting. Where did you find all of your data to support the claims of the digital divide at the local and state level?
That's a great question.
Yeah, is it hard to quantify?
Yeah.
Okay.
It also depends on what it is that you want. What point do you want to make? Do you want to make the point that people have access to the internet? This is actually like a little pet peeve of mine. Sometimes we'll see data by very well-meaning people that say, 96% of Americans have access to the internet. Well, 96% have infrastructure in their area, and that includes satellite, which is like $80 a month, and you have a data cap. So one of the pieces of advice I can give you is be very careful about how it is that you're describing your data, and really boil it down to how many people have internet access in their homes, because really, who wants to go to the library when it's open? And I have 3 children. I can tell you teenagers do not do their homework when you want them to do their homework. They do their homework when you think they should be in bed, right? And the library is closed at that point in time. So access at home. That data for us in the US comes from the census. It is most valuable in larger cities. So if you're in smaller cities, we really don't have any data, right? And we also, even the data on where the infrastructure is comes from the internet service providers. And in the US, they are allowed to say that they cover a census block if they serve 1 customer. Really? Really? Some of those census blocks, if you're in a rural area, are miles and miles big. So our data kind of sucks, frankly. And, here's a really big one. If y'all can get data on the cost of internet in your home, it doesn't exist in the US. You know why? Because who controls that data? Anybody? The companies. So if you can figure out how to get data on the cost of home internet, you're going to change some policies, because it's one of those things the policymakers and leaders just don't understand how unaffordable it is.
Well, we got lots of questions. This is great. I agree we need subsidies to provide affordable access. The question, should government subsidize, or should we regulate industry to make them subsidize?
Oh, who asked that question?
It's anonymous. It's a good question, whoever
Okay,
anonymous is.
Let's have a drink later. That's
5 o'clock somewhere, right?
That's a really good question. So we are definitely struggling with this in the United States, because we currently have a federal government that wants to unregulate everything, including broadband. Look how well that worked for Cleveland, right? So I don't know, I actually think it's a mixture of the two, of regulating, up to a certain point. And then subsidizing what we can't get folks to do. There's a large movement for creation of our own internet service providers. That's a big deal in the US, because our internet service providers aren't covering everywhere we need them to cover. So sometimes folks are just taking matters into their own hands. And so the crazy part of that story is that internet service providers have tried to block that. Come on, if you don't want the job, let somebody else do it.
We've got lots of great questions, so I'm just going to keep going, and then if we have time at the end, I have a couple of more that I do want to ask you.
Okay.
So let's see. Does NDIA promote awareness of, or the need for, consumer digital privacy safeguarding for those who might need it most?
Yeah, most definitely. And that is another one of those issues where we think folks like Mozilla are shepherding that. So we haven't had to do a lot of it at the national level, but our affiliates are teaching it, right? So they're the ones, again, they're the front line. They're the ones doing the real work. So they're the ones that are making sure that those issues are being discussed amongst the communities they serve.
What would be, they moved it, what would be the ideal circumstances that would lead to greater digital inclusion? Is money the major and only blocker to achieving the ideal state? These are awesome questions.
They
by
are
the way.
awesome
They're
questions.
really great.
And no, I know I focus on money a lot, right? That's just the way it works. Because it is such a blocker, but no, it's not the only blocker. There's a lot of awareness. I really appreciated the librarian earlier who noted that she just didn't realize this was an issue. Like, that's totally legit, right? That we do need more awareness, and we do have some libraries that are beginning to address these other aspects. And so doing that kind of awareness and then the sharing of the strategies. NDIA's third annual summit is coming up this spring. We were in Kansas City the first year, we were in St. Paul the second year, we're gonna be in Cleveland this year, and then we should probably head out west. And they, in all of those, the sharing of the best practices is really essential. Because I think it's really important to note that the solutions to digital inclusion are all local, right? And one of the most important things that we know is that trust is a huge factor, right? So if the person teaching you about computers, if you don't trust them, like, look, you don't trust technology to begin with, right? So you got to trust the person sitting next to you teaching you about it. So that's really, really an important point. So those local organizations, what it is that they're doing, having them being able to share those best practices. One of the other things that NDIA has done is we're creating a repository of digital inclusion materials, which y'all are welcome to participate in. I think it's on our website somewhere. But it's, again, our website's digitalinclusion.org. Some of this stuff is under news, if you want to see, like the repository, I think, is there, because it's still in the infancy stages. But those sharing of best practices, that's really, I think, the answer to that question.
So I see one that has 4 thumbs up, so I'm going to go with that one. What are your thoughts on municipally owned and operated networks to address digital inclusion?
That gets back to what I was saying earlier, is that if the companies that are doing it, for the profit model, when that's not working, which it doesn't work in a lot of places, we have to have municipally owned, electric company owned, co-op owned, right? It's not just municipal. There are a variety of models out there that are the community kind of source, where there might be some subsidies involved in getting it started. I think the one important point to all that is that those kinds of internet service providers can have a real focus on inclusion and on particularly the affordability piece. We have a couple in the US that are running their fiber out to housing authorities, like as part of the project, to make sure, because frankly, that's where you know that there are people in need in one small geographic area. So it's kind of low-hanging fruit.
So this one I want to get your thoughts on. So AI and automation, I think it's going to create a bigger digital divide. As I was saying to you the other day, I can't even go to McDonald's, and yes, I take my kids to McDonald's. They like the toys. And talk to a person. I have to go and use a machine now in order to order my kids' Happy Meals.
Yeah.
What does this mean? Like, how are we going to tackle this? Is we're seeing it quite a bit, like when companies like Microsoft are going in and talking and saying, look, we want to digitally transform. How do we do this? Yeah. And the companies are very concerned about the impact to their employees, because it will mean displacement. Yeah. And how do we upskill? And are we tackling this correctly? Because things are moving. Yeah, but right. How do we kind of tackle that? Because it's a big societal problem.
Yeah, I think it's for us to think about the continuum of digital literacy, right? So a lot of NDIA's affiliates address digital literacy at a very entry level, right? We still have some folks who've never used a mouse before, right? Or understand the difference between using a keyboard versus using a tablet, that kinds of level. But then that's a continuum, and all of us are all learning. We're all learning all the time, right? But then put that into a digital context. We're all learning different digital skills all the time. And so if we can raise societies to where there's where we have less or fewer folks where we're still at the entry level and move everybody up a couple of shifts. And then we're all working on these more advanced digital skills. That's the whole raising the whole boat type of idea.
So with this, I see we're out of time. See, I told you 30 minutes wasn't going to be
There's
enough.
this huge timer.
There is, like it's
in
like
front of these
beeping. They're going to like
monitors.
get
It's
the
about
cane
this
and take
big.
us off soon. I have one last question.
Yeah.
And I'd like to thank you for your time, but it's a big one. Ready?
Okay.
Will we ever
I'm ready.
close the digital divide?
No. No. In fact, this is another little, I get angry about a lot of things. I'm not sure if you've all noticed that. This is another thing I get a little angry about, is when there's a reference to closing the digital divide. It's not the, it's a. Because we have lots of digital divides, and frankly, we're just creating more. Net neutrality is creating more, the advancement in technology is creating more, we're just creating more and more and more digital divides. That just needs to be a fact. Like, okay, that's what it is, well then how do we address it? Like, okay, let's figure out solutions.
Well, I think we should all give a round of applause to Angela Siefer, who came up from NDIA. Are you going to be here? As I have a feeling that you've spurred a lot more questions from this audience by the amount that we saw here today.
That's awesome.
So if you're around, I'm sure people.
Yeah, I
can-
love it. Clearly, I love to talk about this stuff. So, and I am going to be here. The quick personal note is my middle child, who's 18, did what your children are not supposed to do, and she met someone online, and now she's dating this girl here in Toronto. So I brought her with me, so I'm here all weekend.
Well, you have lots
And
of
Sarah's
chance.
family's lovely, by the way. It all turned out fine.
Fabulous. Well, thank you, Angela, for joining us
Yes,
today.
thank you all for having me.